Hello, I'm Kate.
And I'm Peter, and we are the Accoil Marketplace Advisors. And today we are talking about pricing in particular, because this is something that we've been working on and talking to marketplace partners about. And it's kind of been top of mind. And we do have an article coming out on pricing and sort of how we think about it in the near future. And we'll link to that in the description below. Kate, before we actually hopped onto this call, we had a quick chat around pricing, and you listed off 6 things that came to mind for you for what to think about when we think about pricing, in particular as Atlassian Marketplace partners on the Atlassian Marketplace. I'll go through them real quick and then we can kind of dive into them as you like. I'm going to throw this to you when I'm done listing them. Okay. So the first one was being value-based with your pricing and understanding your customers, being confident in your pricing, communicating your pricing and price changes, how to think about being strategic with not only your pricing, but what you're building in your app to add the value. And then also around Atlassian's pricing changes they do regularly. And number 5 was total cost of ownership, because when you're selling on the marketplace, you're not selling cleanly, I guess, to someone. You're actually selling on top of Jira, Confluence, some other Atlassian apps. And then the last thing was thinking through cloud versus DC pricing. So going back to the top, why is value-based pricing and understanding your customers such a critical part of getting your pricing right?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to get your pricing wrong. And I know doing pricing stuff used to absolutely terrify me. And I always remember an old pricing specialist, and he always used to say to me, don't do a knife of 1,000 cuts, be confident and just go. But the reason why I used to be so confident was he used to do exceptionally good assessment around pricing. And he didn't just decide to do, oh, I'm going to raise my prices next week. He methodically actually thought about it over a period of time. So he thought about his engineering plan, his roadmap, and working out the bits of which were going to create absolute value, and then basing the pricing decisions around that. And that's what we did when we had our pro forma. We very much linked value of the features with the pricing changes. And I think you'll remember that, Peter. Remember, we used to time and have to announce. And then we used to think about, do we go before Atlassian, after Atlassian? And so you might like to talk a little bit about that, because we spent many hours talking about that. But the underlying platform on all of this, it's all about understanding your customer, isn't it, really? Because if you don't understand them, so in my mind, if you don't have that confidence, then be very careful on your pricing. If you don't have confidence about what your customers think about you, be very careful.
I think that's true with a lot of it. That's features, product, pricing, all of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned before not to, something like 1,000 cuts. Like what do you mean by that? Could you give an example of like maybe how we might do this wrong, and we might get pricing wrong by picking little things, or what does it look like when it's wrong in your experience?
What does it look like when it's wrong? Well, a big one is you need to tell people about pricing changes. So just announcing pricing changes without context really does give people the pip. And I'm constantly surprised about these emails that I get from products who just suddenly say, I'm putting up the prices, boom. And you kind of go, oh, that's come from nowhere. So I kind of have a bit of a hot spot to that. And maybe that's just my bent. I tend to like to be very engaged with my customers, and maybe that's again just me. But the knife of 1,000 cuts is where you keep adjusting your pricing and you don't actually have stability, and you don't actually have a bit of a game plan so that the customer can see, oh yep, that rationale makes sense to me. I can see why that. But you just keep nibbling around the edges with your pricing, and if you've got to make a big price increase, then just go bang and really justify it really well. Well. And allow for exceptions where you need to. So for the transition,
We spent a lot of time on that with Performa, right? And in particular that I forget how large the price increase was, but it was a pretty significant change.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget exactly what the timeline was, but we spent months, A, thinking about it, and then B, communicating it out, getting everyone ready for it. To the point you made before we jumped on the call about thinking about the value that you're adding to your products. It was a whole company effort that went behind the pricing change. It wasn't just someone looking at the numbers saying we need to increase margin. It was actually based on a whole lot of effort and time and investment into the products. And I think, and I personally, I think this is true for most products, that everyone is, for the most part, underpriced, especially if you're spending a lot of time and energy improving a product. It's worth investigating the pricing, but also worth taking that time to make sure that you are communicating it. And I get your point now about, it's like the death by 1,000 cuts. It's, if the pricing is a moving target and your customers don't know what to expect from you, they're probably going to run away. I know I would, or at least be wondering what's going on, maybe lose confidence in the product. So,
but I do laugh because at Think Tilt, when we had Proforma, we actually went too hard, too high in the early days. I do laugh about that. We overvalued ourselves, and as soon as we made the price adjustment, the wheel greased a lot more effectively. But we overestimated where we fitted in, because basically you can see your tiers of pricing. If you look in the marketplace and you analyze pricing in the marketplace and you look at all the apps and the categories, you can kind of see the tiers. High premium, this is things that are just, single feature, quick thing just to solve an immediate problem. So you can kind of see the lay of the land. It's really just understanding. And I mean, that was the other one, wasn't it? About once you're in with a product, once you're with a customer and you know that you're highly used, chances are, and you're solving a big problem for them, chances are you'll be price inelastic. So as long as you treat them with respect, you usually get away. And I think after our big price increase, it just clicked on. We didn't touch churn. There wasn't an uptick with churn. There wasn't too much pushback, blowback. People kind of went, yes, you've been adding in features. Yes, that makes sense. You're charging more. Yep, I'm comfortable with that.
Yep. Yeah. And I think a big part of that was the runway that we gave everybody, because we started communicating that pretty early. And I think I was pretty nervous about talking about it too early, but it in hindsight, and the lesson learned for me anyway, is the earlier the better. Obviously, you're not going to talk about it years out, but the moment you make that decision is when you should be telling customers about it. And I think something that yourself and Simon and Charlie did really well was to make the decision that if it caused hardship, if it was just going to be a deal breaker for somebody, that we were willing to work with them on it. And I think that flexibility to me really left an impression, and it clearly did on customers and partners, that, we're willing to come to the table and be partners with you instead of just sort of treating it super transactionally.
Yeah.
One thing that's come up recently in conversations is pricing new apps. You mentioned understanding your customers. And this is something that we've talked about in this pricing piece that we'll publish. If you were to give someone advice on that, like where to start with that, where would you go as an Atlassian Marketplace partner?
Well, for a start, unless you have some very sophisticated choice modeling and evaluation techniques, I would be suggesting that you don't ask someone, is this a fair price? So I would be working back. And I think in the article you mentioned, I'm a bit of a fangirl around the Mum's Test, which is a great book about how to talk to customers to get information, particularly in the early idea stage. Really would suggest people take a read on that one. But it's really about, particularly in the early days, it's about an understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. But more importantly, it's how they're solving it at the time and whether they're putting effort, which is either time or money, into it. So if you actually start to ask people those sorts of questions, so an example would be, like with forms, when we said, why don't you use the form to collect better detailed information? you just had to say what's happening now. And if a person who wasn't informed with proper data structure would be going, oh, we're spending so much time going toing and froing, instead of finishing off a ticket, in 2 or 3 responses, we're there 10 responses trying to clarify the information we're trying to find people is driving us nutty. We're spending a lot of time and effort. So that was pretty easy to quantify, how many tickets, how much time, calculate the cost of someone's time, and boom, you start to see the size of the problem. But if a customer is actually not spending any time on solving that problem, then it probably actually isn't going to be something they're prepared to pay for. So to me, a customer research is a customer conversations is a really good place to start. And I must admit, I do love the freemium play. So I do love starting with a free play and then basing them up. So you've got a school of thought where you launch free and then add in stuff afterwards. And if you're going to do that, then you've got to be really good at communicating that's what you'd be doing, because otherwise you're going to set a false price point and a resistance. You create friction, and once you do that, and the second thing for me was the reason why I like the free model is I just love the ability to upsell. And by doing that and by talking with customers, you start to get your price point. And then it's a bit easy. It depends if you're a new category where you're setting the price point by yourself. But if it's an existing category, then you kind of have a good sense, and you've kind of got to be a bit realistic, I would have thought, Pete. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the competitive landscape plays a lot into it.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that to segue over to, and this you can probably wrap on this one, but just total cost of ownership of the Atlassian stack. So being marketplace partners, selling on top of Jira. I don't actually know I don't think I have a very strong opinion on how to price related to that, but it is something to consider, right? Like, what does a tech stack look like for an Atlassian customer that is then buying your product? How do you think about that?
It's a good one because I don't think it's immediately obvious. And I still don't think, regardless of what you do, I think it's obvious. But I think it's good to have a sensitivity and an understanding around your ideal customer segment. And we might do another recording about the old ideal customer segment. So it's not your total addressable market, it's your ideal segment. So when you're launching something, you actually go, I am going for this type of profile. It is a Jira administrator who has been using Jira for a couple of years. Chances are they've discovered things that Jira can't do. Chances are this is one of the problems we're going to solve. And so one of the ways you can think about it is, if you understand those customers, you'll get a bit of an idea about how price sensitive they are. So for example, we used to talk at Proforma with a lot of enterprise customers who used to hardly ever raise price with us, hardly ever raise price. They would just go, no, I'm not fussed about the price. I just am interested in solving the problem because it's going to be cheaper than our problem. So, but you do get a sense of how many apps they're using, how many Atlassian products they're using. And I think probably it's more about you being reasonably priced, i.e., your value stacks up for the price you're asking. And I think it's probably more about DC and cloud. If you're shifting them from DC to cloud, and Atlassian's got some pricing stuff on that, and maybe we'll put that in the link, Pete, or maybe even in the article, is that there's some, Atlassian's got they've got about 3 pricing advisory, and you can take some training on that. And I'd probably, if you're a bit unsure, I'd probably look at all of those resources. Now, have I just rambled, Pete, or have I answered your question?
You answered my question.
Did I? You sure? Because I'm kind of going.
Well, I think a lot of it cycles back, right? It all kind of goes in a big circle to me. I think, as we've talked about, you've got to talk to your customers. What's the pain that they're experiencing? How are they solving it now? Then you understand the value, or at least you start to narrow in on the value. What the perceived value from your customers is. And then you can kind of start teasing out what your pricing should be.
I also
think that there's a million and one ways to look at this.
Yeah.
more variables than we could ever talk about.
Yeah.
But to me, it all starts looking at the
Yeah.
customer.
Yeah.
And that's to me what your answer was, is
Yeah.
understanding the use cases, understanding the pains, problems that you're solving, and then just keeping that in relation to, the fact that you, as a marketplace partner, you are selling on top of another piece of software that can be costly. And,
Yeah.
everyone's having the same conversation. So it's, keeping an eye on what Atlassian's charging, I think does make sense.
Yeah. And what solution partners are saying. And Atlassian, I think in a couple of those articles, they talk about their approach to pricing and value based, and they talk about their ratios that they look at. So that's why I'm saying look at that. And I'd look at like the App Fives and the big players of this world, the well established, see how they do their pricing announcements. I love seeing what everyone does, and you can always learn from someone. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's one of those things you kind of have to do. You'll probably never get it absolutely right, and just do your homework and do your very best is probably all I can say.
I think you're right. All right. Well, I think we can wrap there. There's probably way more that we can talk about, but what we may do is come back and talk about those ideal customer profiles. I like something that you and I have talked about recently, and that it's the ideal current customer who gets you from where you are today to that next milestone for you. And I think that'd be fun to explore.
Yeah, that'd be a great one. Great. Well, thanks everyone. And hopefully we've given you some advice that helps. Take care. Till next time.